See, the question is, has God become weightless in your life? By weightlessness, it means it doesn't press down. In the Old Testament, the word glory, the glory of God, and we're supposed to glorify God. Do you know what that word is in Hebrew? It's the word keved, and what it means is heaviness. That's actually what glory means, heavy. It's feeling the weight of God, that I go through life and I feel him watching me. I feel him telling me not to go my own way, not to become foolish. To feel his heaviness is to fear God. Do you know what's happened to most Christians? God is weightless. They don't feel the weight of God. And so what happens is we surrender our mind to foolishness. Romans 12, do you all have that memorized? I beseech you therefore, brethren, you know that? Look at Romans 12 and think about what it says happens to us. Romans 12 says, Paul says, I beseech you therefore, brethren. Now, have you guys had Romans yet? Yes or no? Well, whoever teaches it to you is going to tell you something happens. The first 11 chapters are all doctrine, heavy doctrine. Then verse 1 of chapter 12 says, I beseech you therefore. What Paul is saying is, on the basis of 11 chapters of doctrine, here's how you apply it. And here it is. That you present your body. Why? Last hour I told you, we're going to answer to God for what we do with our body. All sins are going to be forgiven and are forgiven and the record's gone. But what do you do with your body that's not sin? How do you spend your time? That you present your body as a living sacrifice and say to God, I want to be holy and acceptable to you, which is my reasonable service, literally my spiritual worship. You know what worship is? It's not music. It's offering to God what he wants, and that is our bodies as his tool. But look what happens in verse 2. Do not be conformed to this world. See, what's happening is I'm right here, and the world is squashing me and trying to push me into a mold. Whether you know it or not, every day, either you're floating a little more with the world, or you're paddling against it. If you're not resisting, you're floating. Floating means getting squashed to think more like heroes that you've picked. Do you know who my heroes were when I was your age? Hudson Taylor, C.T. Studd, Jonathan Goforth. You probably never heard of them. These are antique missionaries that lived for God in their time period. I have read the biographies of the great, and you guys have a great library down there in Building 4. But you know what? Most young people don't even know these people. C.T. Studd, he was one of the greatest. He still holds a record in sports in England that no one has broken. He's that good. He was the best cricketer, whatever cricket is, but he was the best one in the world. His father owned one of the square miles of farm and pastures. He was a mega millionaire rich kid. And he went to Cambridge University, heard the gospel, and wrote 3 checks and got rid of all of his money and went first to China, then he went to India, and then he spent the last 21 years of his life in Africa. At his funeral, you know where he went in Africa? He went to where the cannibals live, the people that eat other people. They were also pygmies. Pygmies are people that are like only this tall. So they're short African natives. They wore no clothing, and they killed each other and ate each other. They were naked, pygmy cannibals. And he moved there. You ought to read his biography. It's the most fascinating book in the world. I've read it over and over again. And I thought, how would I reach naked cannibals? He said all they did is drink, beat their drums, get into a frenzy, and run off and find more people to kill and eat. And he moved there and lived in a hut. And all he took with him is 2 Bibles, wrapped in oilcloth, he said, because in case one got wet, he didn't want the other one to get wet. And he read the Bible, and he would sit. He was white, and the British were around, and they were afraid of him, and so they didn't bother him. He just lived in his hut. And he would sit outside every day with his Bible by the fire, and they would come and ask him what he's doing, why he's living there among them. And he started sharing the gospel. He did it for 21 years. He died there of a giant gallstone. They said that when they tried to operate on him, the gallstone he had was as big as a grapefruit. It protruded. It was very painful. It was horrible. But he didn't want to leave because he knew he'd never come back. At his funeral, 5,000 of those pygmy cannibals sat around his hut singing the hymns he taught them. They sang to him the last 2 days of his life around his hut. Can you imagine 5,000 people singing songs you taught them? And his journal, he said, not only did they sing, but he said all of them were clothed in banana leaves. They sewed together little skirts because they realized God wants modesty. So they wore banana leaf clothes. And he said, can you imagine? He said, I'm laying here dying, and I have 5,000 people I've led to Christ that no longer are cannibals, no longer are drunken, no longer are demon-possessed. And basically, that was because he surrendered his mind to God's way. He said, I don't want to be conformed to Britain that says it's better to be a sports star and rich.